The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Steve Harvey's dressing room as he adjusted his signature suit and straightened his tie. Today felt like any other day at the studio, busy, structured, and filled with the familiar buzz of production. Steve glanced at his schedule for the day, noting the usual segments, audience questions, celebrity interviews, and family feud highlights. Nothing out of the ordinary. 10 minutes. "Mr. Harvey?" called his assistant through the door, her voice carrying the same professional tone she used every show day. "Thank you," Steve replied, taking a deep breath as he prepared for another day of bringing laughter and entertainment to millions of viewers. 20 years in the business, and he still felt that flutter of excitement before walking onto the stage. What Steve didn't know was that today would be different. Very different. Outside his dressing room, the production floor buzzed with an unusual energy. Staff members whispered to each other, exchanged knowing glances, and quickly changed the subject whenever Steve walked by. The head producer, Tom, had gathered the team early that morning for a special briefing. "Not a word to Steve about today's surprise guest," Tom had instructed firmly. "This needs to be completely authentic. He can't know anything beforehand." The production assistants nodded in understanding, excitement gleaming in their eyes. It wasn't every day they got to be part of something this meaningful. "Is everything set for the second segment?" Tom asked his assistant director. "All arranged. The guest is arriving through the back entrance. We've cleared the hallway and set up the green room with everything requested." Very minimal requests, actually. Just water and privacy. "Seems like a genuinely down-to-earth person." Tom nodded, pleased. "Perfect. And the video package?" "Tested twice. It's ready to roll on your cue." As the minutes ticked down to showtime, Steve made his way through the hallways of the studio, exchanging his usual friendly greetings with the crew. He noticed the odd smiles, the slightly strange energy, but attributed it to the normal stress of live television. "Something feels different today," he mentioned casually to his longtime stage manager. "Just the usual pre-show jitters," she responded, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Big audience today?" "Very enthusiastic." Steve raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. After years in entertainment, he'd developed a sixth sense for when something was up. But he also understood the organized chaos of television production. Sometimes it was better not to ask too many questions. The familiar countdown began, and Steve took his position behind the curtain. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Steve Harvey." The audience erupted as Steve strode onto the stage, his wide smile and confident presence immediately filling the room. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who had found his purpose, greeting the front row with handshakes and acknowledging the cheering crowd with grateful waves. "Well, well, well. Look at this beautiful audience today." Steve's voice boomed through the studio, his energy infectious. "Welcome to the show, everybody. We've got an amazing program for you today." Steve launched into his opening monologue, sharing humorous observations about everyday life that had the audience doubling over with laughter. His talent for finding the funny in ordinary situations had always been his gift, taking the mundane moments of life and reflecting them back to people in ways that made them see the absurdity and joy in their own experiences. "My wife asked me to pick up some groceries yesterday," Steve told the audience, pacing the stage comfortably. "Gave me a list with 15 items, 15, and said, 'Don't call me asking questions.' Now you know what happened?" The audience laughed knowingly. "I called her 7 times. How am I supposed to know which brand of tomato sauce? There's 47 kinds. And what does 'get the good bread' even mean?" As Steve continued his routine, backstage was a flurry of controlled chaos. The surprise guest had arrived, escorted through a private entrance and settled into a secluded green room where no one would accidentally reveal their presence to Steve. "He's here," whispered the floor director into her headset. "Operation Kindness is a go." Tom, watching from the control room, nodded in satisfaction. "Perfect timing. Let's roll with the first segment as planned, then bring in the surprise after the commercial break." On stage, Steve wrapped up his opening remarks and moved into the first planned segment of the show. A heartwarming story about a local teacher who had gone above and beyond for her students during the pandemic. The audience listened attentively, moved by the teacher's dedication. What no one told Steve was that this segment had been specifically chosen to connect thematically with what was coming next. It wasn't a coincidence that they were highlighting everyday heroes today. As the first segment concluded and the show prepared to break for commercials, Steve noticed the production assistant giving him slightly different directions than usual. "After the break, we need you center stage. There's a special segment we've added," she said, her eyes betraying excitement despite her professional demeanor. "Special segment?" Steve questioned. "What special segment?" "It's not on my cards. Trust us on this one, Mr. Harvey. Just be yourself." Steve's curiosity was piqued, but years in television had taught him to roll with unexpected changes. Live TV was unpredictable. That was part of its magic. During the commercial break, Steve watched with growing suspicion as crew members rearranged the stage, bringing in 2 comfortable armchairs instead of his usual hosting position. Something was definitely up. "Can somebody please tell me what's happening?" Steve asked, looking around at his team, who all suddenly seemed very busy with tasks that prevented them from making eye contact. 30 seconds to air, called the floor director, effectively ending any chance for explanation. Steve straightened his jacket and took his position, now genuinely curious about what was about to unfold. Whatever it was, he'd handle it with the professionalism and quick wit that had made him a household name. And we're back in 5, 4, 3, 2. The red light on the camera illuminated, and Steve addressed the audience with his characteristic charm, despite his own uncertainty. "Welcome back, everybody. Now apparently we have something special planned, and I'm as much in the dark as you are." He turned to look questioningly at his producer offstage, who simply gave him a thumbs up and a knowing smile. "Well, all right then," Steve continued, turning back to the audience with a playful shrug. 20 years in television and they still find ways to surprise me. Let's see what they've cooked up. The studio lights dimmed slightly and the large screen behind Steve illuminated. A montage began playing, showing clips from various charitable projects Steve had been involved with over the years. There were scenes of his mentorship program for young men, footage from his foundation's work with foster children, and highlights from community initiatives he had championed. Steve watched, momentarily taken aback. These weren't public relations videos. Many were personal moments he remembered vividly, times when the cameras weren't supposed to be rolling. He saw himself kneeling to speak eye to eye with a young boy who had lost both parents. Another clip showed him sitting quietly with a group of teenagers, listening intently as they shared their dreams and fears. The audience watched in respectful silence, many seeing this side of the famous host for the first time. The charitable work wasn't news. Steve had always been open about his commitment to giving back, but these intimate glimpses into the genuine connection he formed with those he helped revealed a depth that went beyond celebrity, philanthropy. As the video package concluded, Steve stood motionless in the center of the stage, visibly moved and slightly confused. This wasn't the typical trajectory of his show. "Well," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I wasn't expecting a trip down memory lane today." He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Those kids, they're the real stars. I'm just blessed to be in a position to help." Before Steve could transition to what he thought would be the next regular segment, the studio audience began to applaud. Not the usual enthusiastic clapping of an entertained crowd, but something deeper, more reverent. And then, from the side of the stage, a production assistant gave a cue that Steve didn't recognize. The side doors of the studio opened, and Steve turned, expecting perhaps one of the young people from his programs to make an appearance. His eyes widened as he saw who was actually walking onto his stage. The audience erupted in surprised cheers and applause as a familiar figure approached. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a simple but elegant black suit. Even before the studio lights fully illuminated the guest, Steve recognized the distinctive walk and humble demeanor of one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. Keanu Reeves was walking onto his stage, a warm smile on his face and purpose in his eyes. For a moment, the studio fell into a strange silence, the kind that happens when hundreds of people collectively hold their breath. Steve Harvey stood frozen, his expression a mixture of surprise and confusion as Keanu Reeves approached him with that unmistakable humble walk that had endeared him to millions of fans worldwide. The audience recovered first, erupting into thunderous applause and rising to their feet. Camera operators scrambled to capture every angle of this unexpected meeting, while the director in the booth frantically called for close-ups of Steve's genuine reaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves," the announcer's voice boomed, almost unnecessarily as the actor reached Steve and extended his hand. "Mr. Harvey," Keanu said warmly, his voice carrying that distinctive calm that somehow cut through the audience's excitement. "It's an honor to meet you." Steve, who had interviewed presidents and superstars without missing a beat, found himself momentarily speechless. He clasped Keanu's hand firmly, his famous composure returning quickly. "The honor is all mine," Steve replied, his smile broadening into genuine delight. "I certainly wasn't expecting Keanu Reeves to walk onto my stage today." He turned toward his production team off stage with a playful glare. "So this is what all the secrecy was about? Y'all nearly gave me a heart attack." The audience laughed, and the tension of surprise melted into something warmer as Steve gestured toward the two armchairs that had been mysteriously arranged during the commercial break. "Please, have a seat," Steve said, his natural hosting instincts kicking in despite the surprise. "I'm trying to figure out if I'm supposed to interview you or if you're here to interview me." Keanu smiled that subtle, thoughtful smile that had become his trademark. "A conversation would be nice. I've actually been wanting to meet you for some time." As they settled into the chairs, Steve's mind raced. Why would Keanu Reeves want to meet him? They moved in different circles. Hollywood and daytime television rarely intersected beyond promotional appearances. Yet there was something in Keanu's manner that suggested this wasn't a typical celebrity guest spot. "Well, you've got me at a disadvantage," Steve admitted with good humor. "Normally I have note cards and research before I sit down with someone. But I'm guessing this isn't about your latest movie." "Not exactly," Keanu replied, leaning forward slightly. The studio lights caught the silver strands in his dark hair, reminders of a career that had spanned decades. "I'm here because of a connection we share that you don't know about." The audience murmured with interest, and Steve raised an eyebrow. "A connection? Now you've really got me curious." Keanu nodded, his expression growing more serious. "For the past 8 years, I've been quietly supporting your foundation's work with foster children." Steve's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine surprise. His foundation work was deeply personal to him, rooted in his own challenging childhood. While the foundation accepted anonymous donations, he had never imagined one might come from someone like Keanu. "You've what?" Steve asked, his voice softer now. "I believe in what you're doing," Keanu continued. "The mentorship programs, the educational opportunities, the safe spaces you create, they change lives." "I've seen it firsthand." "Firsthand?" Steve echoed, clearly trying to process this revelation. "I'm sorry, but how?" Keanu glanced toward the production booth, giving a subtle nod. The large screen behind them came to life again, showing the exterior of a film set. The timestamp in the corner indicated this footage was from about 2 years ago. "About 5 years ago, I met someone on a film set," Keanu explained as the footage played. "A young man who worked in the lighting department. Incredibly talented, dedicated, with an eye for detail that most veterans in the industry don't have." The footage showed a busy film crew, then zoomed in on a young man adjusting lighting equipment with focused precision. "We got talking during a long night shoot," Keanu continued. "When you're filming at 3 in the morning, you end up having some pretty deep conversations." He told me his story. Steve watched the screen, still confused about the connection but listening intently. "He grew up in foster care," Keanu said. "Bounced around between 6 different homes by the time he was 12. Said he was angry, lost, heading down a destructive path." The footage changed to show a community center with Steve's foundation logo prominently displayed on the wall. Then, when he was 14, he got involved with your foundation's program in Chicago. Said there was this day when you came to speak and you pulled him aside afterward. Steve's expression softened as understanding began to dawn. The foundation had worked with thousands of young people over the years. He always tried to connect personally when he visited the programs, but he couldn't remember every face, every conversation. "According to him," Keanu continued, "you looked him in the eye and told him something he'd never heard before. You said your past is not your future. Your circumstances don't define you, your choices do. And from what I see, young man, you've got greatness in you waiting to come out." Steve sat very still, the memory of those words washing over him. They were words he had spoken many times to young people facing impossible odds, words he believed with his whole heart because they had been true for him too. Those words stuck with him, Keanu said simply. He told me they were the first time anyone had ever seen possibility in him instead of problems. The screen changed again, showing the young man working confidently on increasingly important film projects. his progression in the industry evident. He stayed in the program, graduated high school, got a scholarship to study film, started as a production assistant and worked his way up. Now he's one of the most sought-after lighting directors in the industry. He's worked on 3 of my films. The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the unfolding story. Steve leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the images of the young man's journey. His name is Anthony, Keanu said. And after working with him and hearing his story, I looked into your foundation. What I found impressed me. Not just the programs, but the follow-through, the genuine care. It's not about publicity or tax write-offs. You're actually changing lives. Steve shook his head slightly, visibly moved but trying to maintain his composure. We try, he said simply. We really try. You succeed, Keanu corrected gently. More often than you know. The screen changed again, showing a montage of other young people who had been through Steve's programs, their graduations, first jobs, families. The footage was beautifully edited, capturing moments of triumph and joy. When my team reached out to your foundation to arrange this surprise, we asked them to help us locate some of the success stories, Keanu explained. They found dozens within hours. People who wanted to thank you but never had the chance. Steve's eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching faces he recognized and many he didn't, all connected by the thread of programs he had fought to create and sustain. But here's what really got to me, Keanu continued, his voice taking on a quality of wonder. When we spoke to these people, they all said variations of the same thing, that you made them feel seen. Not just helped, not just supported, truly seen. The screen faded to black and the studio was quiet except for the occasional sniffle from the audience. Steve turned back to Keanu, his expression open and vulnerable, in a way viewers rarely saw from the polished television host. I started supporting your foundation anonymously after meeting Anthony, Keanu explained. I didn't want recognition or thanks. But recently I was at an industry event where Anthony was receiving an award for his work, and in his speech he mentioned your foundation. He said, "Everything I am I owe to someone who took the time to see me." Keanu leaned forward, his usually reserved demeanor giving way to evident emotion. And that's when I realized that sometimes recognition isn't about credit. It's about connection. Sometimes people need to know that their work matters, that the seeds they plant do grow, even when they're not there to see it. The simplicity and sincerity of Keanu's words hung in the air between them. Steve nodded slowly, understanding the deeper purpose of this surprise visit. Anthony couldn't be here today, Keanu said. He's currently working on location in New Zealand, but he sent something he wanted you to see. Steve turned back toward the screen, completely unprepared for what was coming next. The studio lights dimmed further as the screen flickered to life. A landscape of breathtaking mountains appeared, the rugged, majestic terrain of New Zealand where Anthony was currently working. The camera panned across the film set bustling with activity, then settled on a man in his early 30s standing confidently among the equipment, directing a crew with calm authority. Anthony looked directly into the camera, his expression shifting from professional focus to something more personal as he realized this footage would reach Steve Harvey. "Mr. Harvey," he began, his voice clear despite the distance. "I'm not sure if you'll remember me. It was 17 years ago at the Chicago Youth Center." Steve leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen, searching the man's features for the boy he might have known. The audience watched both the screen and Steve's reaction, witnessing this unexpected collision of past and present. "I was the skinny kid with the attitude problem," Anthony continued with a self-deprecating smile, "the one who sat in the back with my arms crossed, trying to look tough while secretly hanging on every word you said." Recognition dawned slowly on Steve's face. 17 years was a long time, but there was something in Anthony's eyes that triggered a distant memory. "You pulled me aside that day," Anthony continued. "I thought I was in trouble, but instead, you talked to me about lighting." Steve's eyebrows raised slightly, the specific detail jogging his memory more clearly. "I'd been messing with the light switches at the center, driving everyone crazy," Anthony explained, chuckling. "But you didn't yell at me. You asked why I was so interested in the lights. Nobody had ever asked me that before." The camera zoomed out to show Anthony standing amidst an impressive array of professional lighting equipment on the film set. The contrast was striking, from a boy playing with light switches to a man creating visual magic for Hollywood productions. "I told you I liked how changing the lights could make the same room feel different," You got excited about that. You said I had an artistic eye and that I was seeing what others missed. Those words changed everything for me. Steve nodded slowly, the memory solidifying. The thousands of young people he'd met over the years often blurred together, but specific conversations, moments of genuine connection, those stood out. After our talk, one of your foundation staff got me into a weekend photography workshop, Anthony continued. Then came the mentoring program, the after-school film club, the summer internship at the local TV station. Your foundation created a path I never knew existed. The footage shifted to show Anthony's journey, photos of a teenage boy with a borrowed camera, video clips of early student projects, a proud moment receiving a scholarship certificate. The visual story of a life transformed unfolded before the studio audience. But here's what I really want you to know, Anthony said, his voice taking on a deeper emotional quality. The opportunities were life-changing, but they weren't the most important part. What mattered most was that day when someone I respected looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something worthwhile. In the studio, the cameras caught Steve's reaction as he listened, his usual animated expressions subdued into something more reflective. Beside him, Keanu watched with quiet attentiveness, respectful of the powerful moment unfolding. I grew up in the system, Anthony continued. 7 homes in 12 years. Do you know what that does to a kid? You start to feel invisible. Or worse, you feel seen only for your problems, your file, your history. Never for your potential. The raw honesty in his voice resonated through the studio. Many in the audience nodded in understanding, some wiping away tears. That day you didn't see a problem, kid. You saw a lighting designer. You saw me before I could see myself. Anthony paused, gathering himself as emotion threatened to overtake his professional demeanor. Behind him, the stunning New Zealand landscape stretched out, a visual metaphor for how far his journey had taken him. Fast forward to 8 years ago, he continued. I'm working as an assistant lighting technician on a small independent film, still learning the ropes, when Keanu Reeves walks onto the set. The camera pulled back to show more of the current film production, an impressive operation with dozens of crew members working under Anthony's direction. The juxtaposition of his humble beginnings with his current success was powerful. During a night shoot, we got talking. Keanu asked about my path into film, and I told him about your foundation and what you'd done for me. I didn't know it then, but that conversation sparked something. Keanu started looking into your work, and, well, he can tell you the rest himself. Anthony's expression became more earnest as he continued. What I want you to understand, Mr. Harvey, is the ripple effect of that one conversation we had. You taking 3 minutes to really see me didn't just change my life, it changed the lives of people I've been able to help since then. The footage shifted to show a small community center where Anthony was teaching photography to kids after hours. The resemblance to Steve's foundation programs was unmistakable. Anthony had created his own version to pass on what he'd received. I run a weekend program for foster kids interested in visual arts, Anthony explained. We're small, just getting started, but we've got 15 regular students now, and every time I work with them, I channel what I learned from you, looking past the tough exteriors to see the potential underneath. In the studio, Steve sat very still, absorbing the magnitude of what he was hearing. The cameras caught the subtle shift in his expression, a mixture of pride, humility, and genuine awe at the reach of actions he had long forgotten. There's this one kid, reminds me so much of myself, Anthony continued. 12 years old, bounced between 4 homes already. First day he wouldn't even look at me, just stared at his shoes the whole time. Anthony smiled at the memory, his face softening. 3rd week he shows up with these photographs he'd taken on an old phone. Pictures of streetlights at night, sunlight through window blinds, shadows on sidewalks. Kid was obsessed with light and shadow just like I was. And I heard your voice in my head as clear as day. This boy has an artistic eye. He's seeing what others miss. Anthony's voice caught slightly. He took a moment before continuing. That boy is now my assistant on major projects. He's got a full scholarship to film school next year. And it all traces back to you, Mr. Harvey. To that moment when you chose to see possibility instead of problems. The footage showed Anthony's young protege working confidently with expensive equipment, the pride on his face unmistakable, the same pride that had once transformed Anthony's life when Steve noticed his potential. So here's what I want to say. From the other side of the world, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for the path you helped create. But most of all, thank you for teaching me how to see others the way you saw me." Anthony paused, seeming to search for the right words to conclude. "You've built an incredible foundation, Mr. Harvey. You've raised millions of dollars, created programs that reach thousands of kids. That's amazing work. But I want you to know that even without all that, even if it had just been that one conversation with one troubled kid, you would have changed the world. Because you changed my world and now I'm changing others." Anthony's voice grew quieter, more intimate. "We don't always get to see the seeds we plant grow to their full height. So I wanted you to see this one, to know that your words took root in ways you couldn't have imagined. What began with you noticing a kid messing with light switches has touched major film productions, influenced artists like Keanu, and is now reaching a new generation of kids who need someone to see their potential." Anthony smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude that transcended the thousands of miles between them. "Mr. Harvey, they say the true impact of a life can never be measured because it ripples outward in ways we'll never know. But today I wanted to give you a glimpse of just one of those ripples. There are thousands more out there, people whose lives you've touched who might never get the chance to tell you. But we're out here, carrying forward what you gave us." The camera pulled back once more to show the full magnificent landscape surrounding Anthony. Mountains reaching toward the sky. Endless possibilities on the horizon. "I have to get back to work now." "We're losing the light," he said with a small laugh, the professional in him resurfacing. "But I'll carry what you taught me through this project and every project to come. Thank you, Mr. Harvey, for everything." The screen faded slowly to black and the studio remained in silence for several heartbeats. The cameras captured the stillness of the moment. Hundreds of people collectively processing the powerful testimony they had just witnessed. And at the center of it all, Steve Harvey, completely motionless in his chair as the full weight of Anthony's message settled upon him. As the screen faded to black, the studio remained in complete silence. No one moved. Not the audience, not the production crew, not even the ever-active camera operators who normally shifted positions between segments. Everyone seemed to understand they were witnessing something raw and real that deserved its own space. The director in the control booth made a subtle gesture, and one camera slowly zoomed in on Steve Harvey. For a man known for his expressive face and animated reactions, his stillness spoke volumes. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the now dark screen, as though Anthony might reappear if he watched long enough. The studio lights remained dimmed, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the hundreds of people present. When Steve finally moved, it was only to remove his glasses with a slightly trembling hand. He blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening under the stage lights. Keanu, sensing the weight of the moment, remained silent beside him. There was no rush to fill the silence, no attempt to move the show along. Some moments deserved to breathe. Steve cleared his throat once, twice, but words didn't immediately follow. He pressed his lips together, fighting for control as emotions clearly threatened to overflow. The cameras captured it all, this unscripted, unguarded moment from a professional who had spent decades mastering the art of television composure. When he finally spoke, his voice came out hoarse and low. "I remember him," Steve said simply, the words hanging in the air. "I remember that boy." He turned toward Keanu, momentarily forgetting the audience and cameras. It was as if he needed to speak directly to someone, to ground himself in the midst of unexpected emotion. "He was so angry when I first saw him," Steve continued, his voice strengthening slightly with the memory. "Sitting in the back of the room, arms crossed, challenging me with his eyes. But there was something there, this spark, you know? This brightness behind all that anger." Keanu nodded, giving Steve the space to process aloud. "I found out later he'd been moved to a new foster home just 2 days before," Steve said. "His third that year. Imagine that. Everything in your life changing every few months. New house, new rules, new school, new people telling you who to be." Steve shook his head slightly, the injustice of it still moving him all these years later. "And yeah, I do remember talking to him about the lights," Steve continued, a small smile breaking through. "He kept flicking them on and off during my talk. Instead of getting mad, I asked him why. Turned out he'd noticed how the same room looked completely different depending on which lights were on, how shadows changed, how people looked different. Kid had an eye for detail most adults miss." Steve turned back toward the audience, but his gaze seemed distant, lost in the memory. "I'd forgotten that conversation," he admitted quietly. 17 years is a long time, and there have been so many kids since then. So many programs, so many cities. You hope you're making a difference, but most of the time you never really know. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. When you do this kind of work, you plant seeds. That's what my mama always told me. Steve, she'd say, you just keep planting those seeds. Some will take root, some won't. That's not up to you. Your job is just to keep planting. Steve's voice caught on the mention of his mother, and he took a moment to collect himself. When he continued, his voice was slightly unsteady. But you don't often get to see the harvest. You don't get to see what grows from those seeds. And sometimes, his voice broke completely and he turned away from the camera, lifting a hand to shield his face as emotion finally overtook him. The audience sat in respectful silence, many wiping away their own tears. This wasn't the polished television moment they had expected when they arrived at the studio that morning. This was something far more genuine. Keanu reached over and placed a hand on Steve's shoulder. A simple gesture of support. The camera caught this quiet moment of connection between the two men. Celebrities in their respective worlds, but in this moment, just two humans sharing in something profound. After a few moments, Steve turned back, no longer trying to hide the tears that had escaped despite his efforts. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, one of his signature accessories, and wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't actually apologizing for his emotion. That just hit me hard. He looked directly at the camera, speaking now to Anthony across the miles. To hear that something I said, something I barely even remember saying, could help shape a life like that? Steve shook his head in wonder. It's humbling. Truly humbling. He turned to Keanu, who had maintained a respectful, attentive silence throughout. And you've been supporting our foundation all this time because of him? Because of that story? Keanu nodded. Anthony's story showed me the real impact of your work. Not just statistics or nice photos for annual reports, actual lives changed. When he told me about your conversation, about how you saw potential in him that no one else had noticed, it resonated with me. Keanu leaned forward, his usual reserve giving way to earnestness. I believe that being truly seen is one of the most powerful gifts we can give each other, he said. My career has put me in the strange position of being seen by millions, but not always truly seen for who I am. Anthony's story reminded me how rare and valuable it is when someone looks past the surface and recognizes something deeper. Steve nodded in understanding. I grew up poor in West Virginia, he said. His voice steadier now. Lived in a car for a time. Had a stutter so bad kids laughed when I tried to speak in class. But I had people, not many, but enough, who saw past all that. Who said, this boy has something to offer the world. Steve gestured toward the screen where Anthony's face had been moments before. That's all I was doing with him. Passing on what was given to me. Seeing him the way others once saw me. The studio remained unusually quiet. The audience caught up in the raw honesty of the moment. Even the floor director had abandoned her usual signals about timing and commercial breaks. Some moments transcended the normal rhythms of television. You know, Steve continued, addressing both Keanu and the wider audience. We live in a world that's always telling us to look at the big picture, build bigger programs, reach more people, raise more money, and all that matters, it really does. He paused, finding the right words. But Anthony just reminded me that sometimes the big picture is made up of small moments. 3 minutes with one angry kid, a conversation about light switches, looking someone in the eye and really seeing them. Steve gestured toward the audience, his natural warmth returning through the emotion. Most of us won't get to change the world in ways that make headlines, but we all get chances every single day to change someone's world. He turned back to Keanu, his composure returning though his eyes remained bright with emotion. Thank you for this. For bringing his story back to me. In this business, in life, we rush forward so fast. Always the next show, the next project, the next goal. We rarely get the chance to look back and see what grew from the seeds we planted. Keanu nodded, understanding evident in his expression. Anthony wanted you to have that chance, he said simply, and I wanted to be part of making it happen. Steve took a deep breath, allowing himself to fully absorb the moment rather than rushing past it. The cameras captured his expression as it shifted from raw emotion to something more contemplative, more grateful. Sometimes we wonder if what we're doing matters, he said, almost to himself. If anyone's really listening, if all the effort makes any difference at all. He looked back at the screen, now dark, but still powerful in what it had revealed. And then something like this happens, and you realize you never really know the impact you're having. A word, a moment, a conversation you've forgotten might be the turning point in someone else's story. The emotion that had overwhelmed him minutes earlier had transformed into something steadier, a quiet wonder, a deep gratitude. "I came to work today thinking it was just another Tuesday," Steve said, a hint of his usual humor returning to his voice. "Now I'm sitting here with Keanu Reeves, crying on national television about a boy I met 17 years ago, who's now lighting movie sets in New Zealand." The audience laughed softly, appreciating his ability to find gentle humor even in such an emotional moment. It was one of the qualities that had made Steve Harvey beloved by viewers, his ability to move seamlessly between depth and lightness, to find the human thread that connected both. "Life is something else, isn't it?" Steve said, shaking his head with a smile that held both joy and wonder. "Just when you think you've got it figured out, it surprises you with something like this." He turned to Keanu with genuine curiosity. "But you mentioned that Anthony sent something more? That there's more to this story?" Keanu nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "There is," he confirmed. Anthony's message was just the beginning. The studio hummed with anticipation as Keanu's words hung in the air. Anthony's message was just the beginning. The audience leaned forward in their seats, caught up in this unexpected story that had transformed a regular talk show into something far more meaningful. Steve, who had regained some of his composure, raised an eyebrow at Keanu. "There's more?" he asked, his voice still carrying the roughness of emotion. Keanu nodded, that subtle half-smile playing at his lips. "Anthony's story, powerful as it is, represents just one life you've touched. After meeting him and learning about your foundation, I started wondering about the others." "The others?" Steve echoed. "The other young people who've been through your programs over the years," Keanu clarified. "Anthony can't be the only success story." Steve shook his head. "He's not. We've had many kids go on to do amazing things. College graduates, business owners, teachers, doctors." "Exactly," Keanu said, his calm voice carrying a hint of excitement now. "So when I decided to come here today, I asked your foundation a question. How many lives has Steve Harvey's work touched over the past 20 years? He turned toward the production booth and nodded. The large screen came to life once more, displaying a single number, 26,782. 26,782 young people have participated in your foundation's programs, Keanu explained. "That's enough to fill this studio audience almost 90 times over." Steve stared at the number, momentarily speechless. Of course, he'd seen statistics in annual reports, had attended graduations and success celebrations. But seeing that number, the total reach of work that had begun with a simple desire to give back, was overwhelming. "Every one of those young people has a story," Keanu continued. "Every one of them was touched by the work you started. And while we couldn't bring all 26,000 of them here today, we did find a few more who wanted to share what your foundation meant to them." The screen changed to show a young woman in a white doctor's coat, standing in a hospital hallway. "Mr. Harvey, you won't remember me," she began, her smile warm and confident. "I was in your Chicago program from 2010 to 2012. Before I found your foundation, I was failing school, hanging with the wrong crowd. Now I'm a pediatric resident at Chicago Memorial. I work with kids from the same neighborhoods where I grew up, showing them there's a path out just like you showed me." The screen shifted to a young man in a classroom, surrounded by eager elementary school students. "Your education initiative got me my first tutoring job when I was 16, he said. "Now I teach 5th grade math in the same school system where I once almost dropped out. Every day I try to see potential in my students the way your program saw potential in me." One by one, the faces appeared on screen. A chef who had discovered his passion in a foundation cooking program, a software engineer who had first touched a computer at a foundation tech lab, a small business owner who had received her first business loan through a foundation partnership. Each story was brief but powerful. Each face carried the same message. Someone had seen them, believed in them, offered them a chance when chances seemed in short supply. Steve watched in stunned silence, his eyes never leaving the screen. The stories weren't all about direct interactions with him. Most of these young people had been helped by foundation staff, by programs he'd started, but hadn't personally run. Yet the thread connecting them all was clear, a vision that had begun with his own difficult childhood and his determination that other children should have the support he had sometimes lacked. As the montage of stories continued, the camera caught Steve's expression shifting from emotional to something more resolute, more purposeful. The tears had dried, replaced by a look of deep attentiveness as he absorbed each testimony. The final face on the screen was a young man in military uniform, standing tall with quiet dignity. "Mr. Harvey, your mentorship program found me when I was 16 and angry at the world," he said. "My mentor through your program was a retired Marine who taught me that discipline and service could channel that anger into something positive. I've now served 2 tours overseas. Next month, I begin training to become a mentor in your program myself." The circle continues. The screen faded once more to the number, 26,182. Then slowly, it began to increase. 26,783. 26,084. 26,785. That counter represents real-time enrollment in your programs across the country, Keanu explained. As we've been sitting here talking, more young people have been finding their way to the opportunities you've created. Steve watched the rising numbers, visibly moved by this tangible representation of ongoing impact. "But there's one more thing," Keanu said, his voice taking on a new quality, less the calm, reserved actor and more the passionate advocate. "When your foundation team helped us connect with these success stories, we found something else, something even more powerful than individual success." The screen changed again, showing a map of the United States with tiny points of light scattered across it. As they watched, some of those lights began connecting to others, forming a web of connections. "Each light represents someone who has been through your programs," Keanu explained. "The lines represent those who have gone on to help others, mentors, teachers, community leaders, founders of their own nonprofits. Your 26,000 have gone on to impact hundreds of thousands more." The web of connections grew denser, spreading across the map like a constellation taking shape. "This is the ripple effect of your work," Keanu said simply. "This is what happens when one person decides to plant seeds." For a moment, the studio was completely silent as everyone absorbed the visual representation of impact spreading across generations and geography. It was no longer about one man or one foundation, but about the exponential power of compassion passed forward. Steve looked at the map, then back at Keanu, a question in his eyes. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you do all this? Put this together, make this happen?" It was the question that had been building since Keanu first walked onto the stage. Why would a famously private Hollywood actor go to such lengths for someone he barely knew? Keanu considered the question carefully before answering, his thoughtful nature evident in the pause. "I've been fortunate in my life and career," he said finally. "That brings opportunities but also responsibilities. When Anthony told me his story, when I saw the direct line between one conversation you had with him and the man he became, something clicked for me." Keanu leaned forward, his usually reserved demeanor giving way to conviction. "We live in a world that's full of noise, full of people shouting for attention or credit. But real change, the kind that transforms lives, often happens quietly, person to person, moment to moment. What your foundation does isn't flashy. It doesn't make headlines, but it matters profoundly." He gestured to the map still displayed on the screen, the web of connections now covering much of the country. "I wanted to show this, not just to you, but to everyone watching, because we need reminders that this kind of impact is possible. That small actions compound, that seeing potential in one angry kid can set in motion changes that affect thousands of lives down the line." Steve nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "So this wasn't just about thanking me," he said. "No," Keanu acknowledged, "though you deserve that thanks many times over. This was about something bigger, about showing what's possible when we invest in each other, about making visible what's usually invisible, the long chain of impact that comes from compassion and opportunity." Steve looked out at the audience, then back at the map, showing the spread of influence across generations and geography. When he spoke again, his voice carried both humility and purpose. "I started this foundation because I knew what it was like to need a chance," he said. "To need someone who sees past your circumstances to your potential. I never expected—" He gestured toward the screen, words failing him momentarily. "That's how it works. Keanu said gently. The best things we do often grow beyond what we could have imagined. Steve nodded, then straightened in his chair, his natural confidence returning but now tempered with the vulnerability of the preceding moments. Well, he said, looking directly into the camera, I guess the lesson here is you never really know the impact you're having. The seeds you plant today might grow into forests you'll never see, but that doesn't mean you stop planting. He turned to Keanu with genuine gratitude. Thank you for this, not just for the recognition, but for the reminder of why this work matters. Some days when the fundraising gets hard or the problems seem too big, it's easy to forget the real purpose behind it all. Keanu nodded in understanding. That's why stories matter. They remind us of what's real beneath the numbers and programs. Steve looked thoughtfully at the map once more, then back at the audience, his expression resolute. I want to say something to everyone watching, he said. You don't need a foundation or a big platform to make this kind of difference. Every one of us has chances each day to see the potential in someone else, a child, a colleague, a stranger, to offer encouragement when it's needed most, to plant seeds of possibility. He gestured toward the screen where Anthony's story had begun this extraordinary journey. And you might never know what grows from those seeds. He continued, but today I got a rare gift, a glimpse of the forest that grew from some seeds planted long ago. And all I can say is keep planting, even when you can't see the results, especially when you can't see the results. That's when it matters most. The studio audience rose in a spontaneous standing ovation, not the practiced applause of a talk show crowd, but a genuine response to the authentic moment they had witnessed. As Steve and Keanu stood together on the stage, the cameras captured not celebrities, but two men united by a shared understanding of how small moments of connection can transform lives across time and distance, how seeing the potential in one person can ultimately touch thousands. The director in the booth made no move to cut to commercial. Some moments deserve to be witnessed in full without interruption. Some stories deserve their own time to unfold. And this one, unexpected and unscripted, had become something none of them would soon forget.